Let me ask you something up front. If you were suddenly thrown back in time, say the year 1372, and forced to join a medieval army, could you survive the first 5 minutes of battle? Before you answer, forget everything you've learned from movies. No gleaming armor, no slow-motion duels, no heroic background music. This isn't a noble last stand with swelling violins. This is chaos, mud, blood, and terror. Now picture it. You're not a knight. You're not royalty. You're not even trained. You're just a tired man from a nearby village who's been handed a dull spear and told to march. You've stood for hours in formation under a blistering sun. Your wool tunic is drenched in sweat. Your legs ache, and your stomach growls. The man next to you reeks of garlic and nerves. There's no inspiring speech. No one's coming to save you. All you have is the shout of a captain you can't even hear over. The noise because the guy with the horn? Yeah, he's smart enough to stay way behind the front line. When the signal finally comes, it's not a dramatic charge. You don't sprint gloriously into battle like a hero in a fantasy film. You shuffle. Your legs are stiff. Your knees buckle, with each step on the uneven, muddy field. The terrain is full of gnarled roots and divots that catch your feet. You trip, maybe fall, maybe cause someone else to fall. And already, your body's tasting the earth. Not from a noble blow, but from clumsiness. And the smell? Imagine the stench of unwashed men packed tightly together, breathing hard, grunting, some crying. Some have been drinking to steady their nerves. Breath mints aren't a thing yet. All of you shout, part to intimidate, part to keep yourself from losing your mind. Historians say over 70% of combatants made noises they wouldn't even remember later. If translated honestly, most medieval war cries would sound like, "I'm not ready for this," or "I want my mother." Then it hits, literally. Someone slams into you. Your shield rattles like a struck gong. Your ears ring. You don't know if it's from the impact or the guy beside you who just screamed like a dying goat. You can barely raise your sword. It's not a graceful swing. It's a desperate jab, more like trying to poke someone in a crowded tavern than a duel. There's no room. You're pressed shoulder to shoulder. Your beautiful broadsword, if you're lucky enough to have one, is almost useless in this tight crush of bodies. Forget all the dramatic wide arcs and flashy spins, they only work when you have space. Instead, your best move might be to grab the blade itself and swing the hilt like a hammer. Yes, that's a real technique. They called it the murder stroke. Subtle, right? You see a flash of movement in front of you, someone lunges, and you raise your shield just in time. The blow lands. Your arm nearly goes numb. The vibration travels all the way to your spine. Your only plan now is to stay upright. Falling means being trampled. You've heard the stories. The battlefield doesn't care who you are. Once you hit the ground, you have seconds to get back up. If you even can. Blood spatters your face. You don't know whose it is. It could be the man in front of you. Could be the man behind you. It could be yours. You don't have time to figure it out. Your vision's narrowing. The world is just noise and heat and motion. You think you hear someone yelling your name, but it might be in your head. Everyone is shouting. No one can hear. The ground is now more liquid than solid. Blood, sweat, spit, vomit. Yes, vomit. Some men throw up from fear, some from the heat, some from the stench. You smell iron, rot, and something sickly sweet. Your gambeson, the padded cloth under your armor, is soaked. It weighs 10 more pounds than it did this morning. You wonder how many pounds of sweat you've lost and if you're actually lighter or just closer to passing out, and this is just the beginning. You steal a glance at the man you're fighting. He's not a monster. He's terrified like you. His armor is dented, his weapon shaking. For a brief moment, you both pause, and maybe, just maybe, share a look that says, "What are we doing here?" But then the chaos takes you again. You jab forward. He swings, and everything fades into muscle memory. Weapons break. Shields splinter. You're not counting hits. You're not trying to win. You're just trying not to lose. Trying to stay alive one more minute. There's no music playing to honor your bravery. No one is watching to write songs about your courage. Just the unrelenting noise of survival. You see a body fall. Maybe he slipped. Maybe he was struck. You want to help, but you can't. You take one step to the side and nearly fall yourself. The ground is too slick, you step on a boot, it's still attached to someone. You move on, time stretches. A minute feels like 10, 10 feels like an hour. You're not thinking anymore, you're reacting. Swing, block, duck, scream. Somewhere, someone is sobbing. Another is laughing, madness born from adrenaline and trauma. The lines blur. You no longer know where the enemy ends and your allies begin. Welcome to the medieval battlefield. It's not a tale of glory. It's not a place for honor. It's a grinder, chewing up bodies and spitting out whatever remains. And somehow, after all this, you're still standing, still breathing, still clutching that sweat-slicked handle in your trembling hands. But it's far from over. If Part 1 showed you the chaos of surviving the first few moments in a medieval battle, Part 2 brings you deeper into the meat grinder, literally. Because once the panic sets in, and your brain shuts off higher reasoning, your body becomes a machine, and machines need tools. In war, those tools are weapons, not the polished museum relics we see today. No, these were brutal, often improvised, and terrifyingly effective. Let's start with axes. There's something brutally honest about a battle axe. It doesn't pretend to be elegant. There's no mystery to how it works. You raise it, you bring it down, and whatever's in the way gets split. It's the kind of weapon that doesn't require years of training. Just rage, momentum, and a general sense of direction. It was essentially a modified version of a tool every peasant used back home to chop firewood or kill a pig. You didn't need finesse, just the nerve to swing. But here's the catch. Axes often got stuck in a shield, in a helmet, in someone's ribcage. Battlefield archaeology reveals an eerie pattern. Axe wielders who died with their weapons still lodged in their enemies, unable to pull them free. Imagine the panic. You finally land a blow and your weapon won't come out. You yank, the enemy screams, or they don't, and in those precious seconds someone else buries a sword in your side. So then, there's the spear, the quiet king of medieval warfare. Swords may look cooler in movies, but spears ruled the real battlefield. Cheap, fast to make, and deadly at 6 feet of reach, they didn't require noble blood or martial arts. A sharpened stick with a metal tip could punch through a man before he got close enough to do you harm. Entire armies used them. Some formations, over 70% spear wielders. But spears weren't perfect. In tight groups, they were more like accidents, waiting to happen. Many soldiers got jabbed by their own side more often than the enemy. Chronicles mention panicked footmen spinning around and spearing their comrades in the thigh or worse. Battlefield confusion didn't care about friendly fire. You only had a few feet of space, poor visibility, and split-second reactions. And, when fear drove the arm, aim went out the window. So what do you use when armor becomes common and swords or axes just bounce off? You stop trying to cut. You start trying to crush. Enter the mace, a metal ball on a stick, that's it. Pure, unfiltered violence, no edge, no tip, just raw weight. Against plate armor, it didn't matter if you couldn't pierce it. If you caved it in hard enough, the bones inside still snapped. A solid mace strike to the helmet might leave the armor intact but turn the brain inside to soup. And here's the beautiful irony. Religious knights actually preferred maces. Why? Because they didn't shed blood. According to some interpretations of medieval Christian doctrine, bashing someone's skull in was more spiritually acceptable than slicing them open. One knight might tell you, I didn't kill him with a blade, I simply applied God's will with concussive force. Now let's talk swords, the celebrity weapon of history. Yes, swords were real. Yes, they were deadly. But here's what. Movies don't tell you they were rare and ridiculously expensive. A finely crafted sword could cost the same as a small house. Nobles carried them as status symbols. For the average soldier? Forget it. You might see one, maybe hold one if the man using it died in front of you. Even then, they weren't indestructible. Archaeological finds reveal that many swords were patched together, repaired multiple times. They bent, they broke. Swing too. Hard and miss? You might find yourself holding a glorified butter knife. Worse yet, swords weren't even the deadliest weapons on the battlefield. studies of medieval mass graves show more skull fractures than slashing wounds. That's because most people died from blunt trauma or crush injuries, not graceful swordplay. And what about the peasants who couldn't afford any of these? They got creative. They used farm tools. Flails were originally grain threshers. Pitchforks, shovels, hammers, all adapted for war. You'd be surprised how many people were killed by improvised weapons. One French militia was famous for converting pruning shears into spear tips. And while it might sound ridiculous, death by shovel was just as final as death by sword. Just a lot harder to explain in the afterlife. But that leads us to something even more disturbing: the wounds. These weapons weren't designed to look good. They were designed to maim. Chainmail? It worked. Once or twice. But after a few heavy blows, it became part of the problem. Axes folded the mail inward, driving it into flesh. Maces crushed it against the body. Knights were found with bones shattered inside intact armor. Like a medieval version of bubble wrap, you survived the first impact. Maybe. Then came the blood loss. In modern movies, heroes fight on despite sword wounds. But the human body doesn't work like that. Lose 2 pints of blood? You go into shock. Lose 4. You're unconscious, and battlefield wounds weren't surgical. They were torn, ragged, filthy. A swing to the shoulder didn't leave a clean cut. It shredded tendons, broke bone, and poured blood like a faucet. Sometimes you didn't even know you were injured. You'd feel fine, then suddenly dizzy, knees buckling. Or worse, you took a hit from a mace, felt no pain, but collapsed minutes later from internal bleeding. That's what medieval doctors called the "he was fine 5 minutes ago" syndrome. No visible wounds, just death blooming silently inside the body. And when you were wounded, there were no medics, no triage tents, just other soldiers tying belts around your limb or a friend heating up a dagger to cauterize a wound. Painkillers, maybe some alcohol. Surgery, if you were unlucky, yes. Sterilization, never. Infection, almost guaranteed. Monastic hospital records show that for every man killed in battle, up to 3 more died afterwards from infected wounds, sometimes from something as small as a scratch on the finger that swelled into deadly sepsis. Battlefield. Surgery was brutal and fast, mostly amputation, not because it was necessary, because it was efficient, and if the wound didn't kill you, the trauma might. Survivors didn't talk much about what they saw, but those who did described horrifying images. Men walking around with half their faces missing, someone choking on blood, a friend screaming until his lungs gave out. Some woke up days later with no memory of what happened. Others had dreams that never ended. In the end, the weapon that hurt most wasn't a blade or a hammer. It was memory, and the battle hadn't even ended yet. It's been 10 minutes since the clash began, that's all, just 10 minutes. But in that time, you've aged a year, maybe more. Your body is a mess of bruises, burns, and blood. Some yours, some not. Your shield feels like a stone slab strapped to your forearm, and your sword, or whatever you're holding now, is little more than a metal stick covered in dents and regret. But it's not your body that's failing you now. It's your mind. Something strange happens to a person during battle. And I don't mean courage or cowardice, I mean the quiet, creeping erosion of who you are. The transformation from person to something else. Something primal. Something automatic. At first, it's just confusion. Where am I? You were in formation, right? You knew which direction you were facing. You knew who was next to you. You knew where your commander stood. Now, you spin to avoid a strike and suddenly nothing looks familiar. You can't see banners. You can't hear commands. Just grunts, screams, and a blur of movement. Dirt clogs your eyes. Helmets block your vision. Everyone is covered in the same mud-brown crust. And that man rushing toward you? Is he friend or foe? Does it even matter? Studies of historical battle accounts suggest that over 60% of soldiers in large medieval engagements lost their sense of direction within the first few minutes. That's not a metaphor. It's a literal loss of compass. Armies that began facing each other north-south might find themselves tangled east-west within minutes. In one famous instance, the Battle of Barnet in 1471, dense fog and panic led English troops to attack their own side, not by accident but by total confusion. Friendly units mistook one another for enemies and slaughtered their own men. It wasn't until the carnage was nearly complete that anyone realized the truth. By then, it didn't matter. This is why the battlefield became a psychological trap. When the edges of reality start to melt away, fear takes over. Rational thinking evaporates. You start asking questions no one can answer. Is this my blood? Is that man alive? Am I even alive? You've heard of the fog of war. It's not just a poetic phrase. It's the literal inability to see clearly, think clearly, or feel grounded in your own body. The brain, desperate to protect itself, starts to shut things down. High-level thought, gone. Memory, fragmented. Morality, muted. What takes its place? Instinct. You start moving like an animal, swinging at anything that moves, ducking before you even register the threat, striking without thinking. You no longer process the shape of a person, you just see motion and react. A flash of steel, a shift of shadow, and your blade finds something soft. In this altered state, time bends. Minutes stretch like hours, or collapse into a single moment. Soldiers later wrote of battles where they remembered only the first blow and the last cry, nothing in between. Their minds had packed the trauma in bubble wrap and locked it away, somewhere far out of reach. This phenomenon is well documented in modern combat psychology. It's called battle mind, a trance-like state where the conscious self detaches. The body fights on, but the person, whoever they were, disappears for a while. One soldier wrote, "It was like watching myself from above, like I wasn't inside my own skull anymore." Another said, "Everything was red and gray, there were no faces, just meat." And once this mental detachment begins, errors multiply. You swing too wide and strike your friend. You chase a fleeing figure only to realize they're from your side. You freeze when you should run. You run when you should fight. This is why many battles ended in mass retreats. Not because one side lost courage, but because fear went viral. All it took was one scream, one cry of "we're losing," and the mental dam broke. Soldiers threw down weapons. Some wept. Some collapsed. Others ran. Running wasn't cowardice. It was survival. In fact, medieval foot soldiers had a saying, "The graveyard is full of heroes. The tavern is full of runners." They didn't want songs. They wanted another meal, another laugh, another sunrise. And who can blame them? Because even fleeing had its horrors. There are stories, confirmed by written chronicles, of men suffocating under piles of their own comrades as they tried to climb a narrow ditch, of knights drowning in their armor, face down in a stream while trying to escape, of terrified peasants hiding under the bodies of the dead for hours, praying they wouldn't be noticed. One French soldier, captured during a failed rout, later confessed that he survived by crawling into the stomach of a dead horse. He waited there, half delirious, for 2 full days before crawling back to his village. Was he a coward? Or a man who simply did what he had to do? It wasn't only retreat that brought disillusionment. Victory did too. Because what does it mean to win a medieval battle? There's no flag to raise, no speeches, no orchestra swelling to a major chord, just silence, exhaustion, emptiness. If you were still standing when the dust settled, congratulations, that was victory. Not because of honor or righteousness, just because you happened to still be breathing when the dying stopped. One chronicler described the end of a battle as the sudden falling of a curtain upon a stage soaked in blood. No cheers, just groans, shallow breath, the faint clink of metal as someone tried to stand. Some men didn't even realize the fighting had ended until someone tapped their shoulder, and what happened next was no less grim. You took stock of your body, arms, legs, fingers. You checked for wounds you didn't remember getting. You looked for your friends and found only boots, broken spears, or someone's helmet still clutched in a lifeless hand. You might weep. You might laugh. Most didn't do either. They just sat down, too tired to think, too numb to feel, too shocked to know what to do next. Because in that moment, with the screaming gone and the silence rising, it finally hit you. You had survived, but you would never be the same. The worst part wasn't the fighting, it was what came after. You might think that surviving a medieval battle meant the worst was over, that you'd get to go home, sit by a fire and sleep off the horror. But that wasn't the reality for those who walked away. Because once the screaming stopped, a new silence began, one that many couldn't bear. You didn't walk off the battlefield victorious. You limped, crawled, or were dragged. You were coated in grime, your hands shaking from hours of holding a weapon, your breath short and ragged. If you were lucky, you still had all your limbs. If you were luckier, they still worked. And yet, that wasn't a guarantee you'd survive. The air was thick with the coppery stench of blood. Buzzing flies arrived before the medics, if there were any. Birds circled above. Dogs waited at the edge of the field. The sun, once hot and cruel, now felt cold as it set on the carnage. You saw things, your friend's severed hand still clutching a hilt, a man breathing through a hole in his throat, another crying for his mother while no one came. There was no applause, no triumph, just a sickening realization. This was it. Victory meant you were alive, for now. If you could still move, your first instinct was to wipe your face and check for wounds. Blood on your arms? Could be someone else's. Could be yours. You might not even feel the injury until later. Adrenaline is strange like that. A cut across the belly might seem fine until you bend over and realize your insides are no longer inside. You searched for friends. Some were there, stunned, silent, staring into nothing. Some weren't. You stepped over them, or on them, or found what was left of them. You tried to call their names, but your throat was raw from screaming, or from the dust, or from the sheer effort of staying alive. Then came the scavenging. In medieval warfare, there was no shame in looting the dead, especially your enemies. Armor was expensive, swords even more so. A single breastplate could feed your family for a year. So men tore pieces off the fallen, belts, boots, helmets. Some stripped their own comrades, apologizing under their breath. He would have wanted me to have it, they said. Maybe they were right. The field became a grotesque marketplace. Swords were yanked from lifeless hands. Rings were bitten off swollen fingers. Sometimes a not quite dead man twitched and someone stepped in to finish the job. Not from cruelty, but from efficiency. No one wanted a wounded enemy getting back up. Even the boots were up for grabs. One soldier wrote in a letter that he found a pair without too much blood in them. That counted as a good find. And what about the wounded? There were no stretchers, no medevac teams. You either walked or got left behind. If you were lucky, someone carried you. If you were really lucky, they didn't drop you when the looters came. Some soldiers played dead until the field cleared. Some called out softly, hoping their friends heard. Others screamed for help until their voices cracked, and no one came. The field hospitals, if they existed, were barely more than tents. No beds, no antiseptic, just straw, screaming, and the smell of rot. Surgeons worked quickly with knives that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. They cauterized wounds with heated iron, sawed off limbs without anesthesia, and sometimes bled you, on purpose thinking it would balance your humors. The survival rate, roughly 30%. And if you lived through that, great. Now you got to deal with infection. Every cut was a death sentence waiting to happen. Gangrene set in fast. One monk noted that wounds turned black by morning and stank of the devil by night. Antibiotics wouldn't exist for another 600 years. Sleep didn't help. The moment you closed your eyes, you were back in the mud, back in the crush, back in the roar of pain. Some soldiers flailed in their sleep, punching at enemies who weren't there. One chronicler told of a man who woke screaming every night for a year, until he didn't wake up at all. And then there were the ghosts. Not the supernatural kind, the real ones. The ones that whispered while you tried to eat. The ones that hovered behind you when you walked through the village. The faces you remembered. The ones you didn't. The things you did to survive that no one should have to do. You didn't brag about the battle. You didn't tell stories to children by the fire. You kept it locked inside, hoping it would stay quiet. But it didn't. Your body healed mostly. Your mind maybe not. And still, the world moved on. You returned to your village. You were expected to till the fields, to hold your children, to smile at the harvest feast. You were alive. Wasn't that enough? But every loud noise made you flinch. Every crowded room made you sweat. Every time someone shouted your name, your hand went to a sword that wasn't there. You were not the same. You never would be, and no one noticed. Because medieval warfare didn't come with medals. There were no psychiatrists, no words like PTSD or survivor's guilt. There was only ale, a dark corner, and maybe the priest if you were desperate. Some turned to God, some turned to drink, some simply walked into the woods and never came back. And the field where it all happened, it didn't get cleaned up. It grew. Over grass swallowed the blood. Trees covered the bones. Children played there decades later, never knowing they ran across the graves of hundreds. But sometimes, after a hard rain, bits of metal surfaced. A rusted pommel, a cracked helmet, a broken spearhead lodged in a tree root. Reminders that the ground itself remembered what happened even if no one else did. The battle ends. The field quiets. The dead are buried or not. The wounded either heal or don't. And you walk home. If there's a home left. Your armor is rusted from dried blood and rain. Your boots are torn. You haven't eaten a real meal in days. You carry the same weapon you started with, though it no longer looks like something forged. It looks like something survived. There's no parade waiting, no feast, no villagers cheering your return. People look at you the way they look at a storm on the horizon, something they don't understand but know better than to ask about. Because while the swords may be sheathed, the war has followed you. It lives in your silence. It lives in your sleep. In how you flinch at raised voices. In how your eyes scan every room for exits. In how you pause before entering a tavern, heart racing, hands twitching. The war is over, but the fight isn't. Because in medieval times, there was no language for trauma. No concept of healing what the eye couldn't see. There was only, you're alive, be grateful. So you pretend, you try. But when the wind changes and you smell wet soil or hear the clash of metal in the blacksmith's yard, you're back there, knee-deep in mud, gasping for breath, swinging, at ghosts. That's what makes medieval battle so different from the stories we tell about it. We love tales of knights and glory, of last stands and noble deaths. We imagine banners fluttering and speeches echoing over valleys. But the real thing? It was messy. It was shameful. It was terrifying. And more than anything, it was forgettable. Not by the men who fought, no, but by everyone else. Most medieval battles weren't even recorded properly. Names were misspelled, dates forgotten. Thousands died anonymously, buried in unmarked pits. Not a single word carved for them. No marker, no memory. A sword might end a man's life in seconds. But forgetting, that's the final death. And yet, there's something strange about the way we still romanticize it all. We build monuments. We write songs. We reenact battles on sunny weekends wearing plastic helmets. And yes, there's value in remembrance. But if we only remember the pageantry, the clean lines and polished steel, we miss the point. Real war wasn't about honor. It was about survival. The kind where you played dead under a horse until dark. The kind where you dug splinters out of your arm with a dagger. The kind where you lost half your friends and didn't cry, because crying meant remembering, and remembering was worse than forgetting, and yet, those who lived didn't all come back broken. Some became farmers again. Some found laughter. Some even fell in love. One man, a former pikeman, returned to his village and became a brewer. He never spoke of the 3 men he killed at Bosworth. But every year on the same date he would give free ale to the town and sit alone under a tree with his helmet beside him. People didn't ask why, they just nodded. Maybe that's what recovery looked like then. Quiet rituals, silent prayers. A life rebuilt one piece at a time, never whole, but still standing. Others didn't make it that far. Some drank until they couldn't stand. Some wandered off into forests. Some joined the next war and the one after that, not because they wanted to fight, but because fighting was the only place they felt normal. And then there were the stories that never made it into books, of young boys who lied about their age to fight and never came home, of daughters who nursed their fathers back from the edge of madness, of wives who welcomed back husbands who weren't husbands anymore, but strangers shaped by horror. These are the real casualties. And so we return to the question that opened this story. What actually happened in a medieval battle? This happened. The fear, the filth, the confusion, the heartbreak, the survival, the quiet. It wasn't slow-motion sword fights or poetic death scenes. It was slipping in mud and choking on smoke. It was accidentally stabbing a friend and hoping he'd forgive you. It was praying the man you just killed had no children. It was walking away from a field of corpses and pretending you weren't one of them. Inside. The truth of medieval battle is not found in victory. It's found in what's left after, in what the survivors carry, in what the dead cannot say, and in what we choose to remember or not. So the next time you see a knight on screen charging valiantly toward a line of foes, think of the mud. Think of the spear breaking in his hand. Think of the friend he might have stepped on while trying to run, and then think of what it takes to keep walking when every part of you wants to lay down and never move again. That's not glory. That's humanity. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we should be honoring all along.